All right, we are locked in, you're locked on, we're live, and this is Misaligned. Welcome back, Farouk. It's been a minute. You have been sorely missed, and I'm definitely looking forward to having another conversation. Probably going to be quite rigorous as usual.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Tonight, we're diving into one of the more dangerous escalations that's happened on the planet, to be fair. Israel versus the almighty Iran. Two regional giants locked in a shadow war for decades, as we all know. But now the shadows are gone and the fighting is real. Why now, though? What's at stake? And why should Africa and the wider world care? Yeah, me? Let's get into the fire.
Hi, hello everyone. Good to have you back again, Farouk, after 3 long episodes away.
Pleased to be back.
Jab, Cross, and everyone else who's joined us. We're talking about war today, and hopefully our conversation won't degenerate through misalignment into war. It's Israel versus Iran. They've been at it for a long time, as we know. But the bombs are raining down now, the missiles, and I'm sure there'll be plenty for us to say about that. But I suppose a historical context would be in order, wouldn't it? What's the context for this? And I'm honored to say who better to give us that context than Jab. How do you see this? What is the context? Why are the bombs raining? Why now?
Yeah, okay, thank you. And thank you everybody for joining us. I think that this is long coming. It was a question of when and not if. And the first misconception to correct is that this isn't an Israeli war against Iran. This is US. And I would point people to two important videos. You can search this on YouTube. You'll find Joe Biden, I think in 1997, thereabout, saying that Israel is the most important 20 billion, I think it was 20 billion that he said, 20 billion investment that they've made, because it allows the US to protect and to project its power and also protect its interest in West Asia, aka Middle East. And there's a more recent video of RFK Jr. Making the same statement, basically saying that America needs the Middle East, it needs the resources there, and it needs to protect its interest there. And Israel serves that purpose, and therefore it's a very good investment. Now, in the US, okay, so people say it's a democracy, but you can go back again to history and see how the country itself started, how Nigeria, India, all of these places started. They all started up as companies. It's no different today. And there's a very important policy paper. I don't know if you can put that up for us, Cross. I'll just show you the cover. I think it's called Pathway, or Which Path to Age to Persia. Persia obviously being Iran. And in that document, there is a bullet by bullet. There's also a table of contents there. This document is over 100 pages long, but it's important for people to read it, because the think tanks, when they write these papers, they're not hiding it. Everything that they're doing is actually all in. Okay, so that's the. You can download this from the internet.
Just to clarify though, so this is the work of a think tank. This is not an official, certainly not explicitly official US policy. So this is it might be that they're going with it, but this is not official US policy.
Okay, page 2. Let's see the table of contents. Whilst he's finding it, so I'll just keep talking. So this was by the Brookings Institute. If you want to know which companies support this, you can look. It's all there. It tells you which companies sponsor this. Okay, so I don't have my glasses here. If any of you is able to read, we can just read through. Thank you. Okay, yeah, there. Okay, so part 1, dissuading Tehran, the diplomatic options, and offer Iran shouldn't refuse, persuasion, tempting Iran, the engagement options. So I hope you guys don't mind. Maybe I can just talk through. Chapter 1 essentially talks about the Iran nuclear deal. The idea, according to this paper, is make an offer to Iran that everybody's going to think, whoa, you must be very crazy to not accept this offer. But actually, Iran, I think, is ahead of this game. It accepted the offer. Then Trump came and pulled out of this of the agreement. And I think the idea was, again, so that if Iran withdrew, then there will be an excuse to then say, there you go. Now we can start to rain the bomb. So Iran stuck with that agreement. So that obviously, that didn't work. So then you go to disarming Tehran, the military options, going all the way, invasion, airstrikes. So obviously, those options would be very costly, because if America does that, the whole world knows that it's America that is actually, being the aggressor here. Number 5, chapter 5, is really the option that where we are now, which is leave it to Bibi. So allowing or encouraging an Israeli military strike. Okay. Part 3, toppling regime change. It talks about velvet revolution, so supporting a popular uprising. We had that last year or the year before, where they tried to, induce the citizens to rise up against the government. There was all the thing about the hijab and the head covering and all of those things. So, but many iterations of them over the years. So you can go down sort of. There's more, but can you would you mind just sharing the last one, please? I'm just going to take a little. There's just a quotation from just the last document, if you've got that, please. So, yeah, thank you. Okay, so if you make that big, we'll just read the one that has been highlighted in red. Okay, so it says, yeah, so, okay, so maybe from the top, actually, as in the case of American airstrikes against Iran, the goal of this policy option would be to destroy key Iranian nuclear facilities in the hope that doing so would significantly delay Iran's acquisition of an indigenous nuclear weapons capability. However, in this case, an added element could be that the United States, so I'm reading the bit in red now, the United States would encourage and perhaps even assist the Israelis in conducting the strikes themselves, in the expectation that both international criticism and Iranian retaliation would be deflected away from the United States and onto Israel. And it goes on to explain, the logic for this. So what I'm trying to say is that, so I see your point, Yemi, which is that this is not official US policy, but you can follow the official US policies are actually the works of think tanks, which are then
yes, but not all think tanks. Again, I think it's important for us to to point this out, just so that we don't. There are hundreds of think tanks. I can pull out think tanks that say the opposite of this in America, right?
Yes.
So it's important for us not to say that the work of a think tank unequivocally equals. Again, I'm not saying it may not be so in this case, but that cannot be said in all cases. I think that's I think that's fair to say. There are hundreds of think tanks in the UK.
What you're
sometimes saying some totally opposite things. They're just doing their own work, which is.
If I may just jump in here. Nice to be back, everyone. I missed the last 3 episodes, and I'm glad to be back on Misaligned. Yemi, I think focusing. It's good to highlight that the Brookings Institute.
It's just a by the side point, and
that's the point. It's good to highlight that paper is from a think tank.
Yes.
But I guess dwelling on that.
No, I'm not dwelling on it. I'm actually just calling people.
Yeah, I think if we dwell on that, then we miss.
No. I'm not dwelling on it.
Okay,
So once
then
someone
we may
points
miss the
something out,
point.
let me tell you how not to dwell on things. When someone points out something that's obvious to you, right? Accept it that yes, that's true. Then you move on. The reason people dwell on things is that when someone points out something that's obvious, that this is the work of a think tank, this is not US policy. Once you start dancing around that point, then the dwelling becomes inevitable. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'll go.
Because it's
I'll
just
go.
the fact that this is.
I'll go on to make my point now. I think that, I mean, Jabs, correct me if I'm wrong. I think what you're trying to do is to make the point, not particularly the point in the paper, but make the point that this has all been planned and it's all coming. Because in fact, what we are seeing is US policy. Arming, funding, protecting, and giving political cover, diplomatic cover, sanctioning the ICC, and Trump himself saying the attacks were excellent. Saying BB can do what it is. So there is no guess what US policy is as we speak. And I guess the point is going back.
But there's
we're
nothing
going back
in
a few years
tank.
to say
there's nothing
this
in a
is
think
this
tank
has been
document
coming.
that confirms that.
And granted the point,
it is what the US is actually doing.
Yeah. So granted the point, I think Jab's point is to say that. Yeah, I think it's important to say the think tank is not government. It's not government policy. This is a 15-year-old document. But the point is, we see policy being implemented now. It's been done by a think tank 15 years ago.
Exactly. So let me explain to you why this.
No,
important.
This is not for you. This is not for you. It's for our audience, so we don't miss that link, and so that we don't doubt the fact that what's in the Brooklyn's paper is actually manifesting as policy today, whereas 15 years ago it was not policy. And in fact, many people would have suggested different things.
That's absolutely correct. But I think what our audience also need to know, right, is that a think tank's policy does not mean you. So this is one case where I agree. What we're seeing today it seems to be perfectly reflected in that. But that doesn't mean that you pick up any think tank that proves US policy. No, it doesn't. You know, there are cases where it will align. There are cases where it will completely not align, right?
Granted, taking considered.
So we can look at what the US is doing today and say this is their policy without referring to any think tank, because I can pull out, if I go to Google, I can pull out think tanks. I'll say the opposite of that. American think tanks.
Yemi, granted that think tanks don't translate to policy. Yeah. The point is, current policy was reflected in a think tank work 15 years ago, and Jabs is making the point, and in fact, it started by, I think the point is to say this has been coming.
Yes, but I think, I think the risk with this, so the risk with this is to think that all of this is some totally sort of agreed thing that, you know, there's no, this is what the US is. There are no dissenting voices. There are no, because the think tank has said it, the US is doing it. Of course, the think tank has said it. There'll be lots of think tanks that are saying the opposite of that in the US. I can tell you that.
I mean, even as we speak, there is debate within the US as regards how to deal with this. So that's granted. Jabs, make your point.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt.
It's okay. You've gone off tangent. It really wasn't the point I was trying to make. I think that we would accept that, you know, I wasn't making the argument that a think tank paper is the same thing as an official US policy. The point I'm making is that official US policies start as what these think tanks people write. That's where the official policies come from. And so for some of these things, and I agree, yes, there are thousands of think tanks, and they would all write, you know, different kinds of things, and they take these things to the Senate, and they decide which policy they want to change. But looking at this particular paper, there is no question that this is what it looks like a dog. It works like a dog. You know, it's got to be a dog. It's not. There's no question on my mind that this is what policy is being followed at the moment. There is one similar. 1 second, sorry. in Ukraine, again, you will see that it says that that's called overextending Russia. You read that paper and you see what is happening today. It's almost bullet point by bullet point. So, but my point is that this whole thing is long. 2 points I'm making is long in the making. And number two, this is not an Israeli aggression. This is US foreign policy. And in the same way that they're using Ukraine as a proxy, it's the same way that Israel is being used for that purpose. So point is that none of this is actually a surprise. And if you read in more detail, the reason that Iran has become, it's in the position where it is because it's pursuing an independent sovereign policy. This is what America and the West perceive as a threat to their hegemony. Any country that wants to stand on its own and pursue an independent sovereign policy and not be dependent upon them, that country is a disaster because is an enemy, perceived as an enemy, because it's going to then provide an example to other nations. And once other people start doing their own thing, the rules-based order does not hold. So that's where we are. It's how is this going to end? We'll have to see. I'll let other people speak because this is just introduction, but comments are welcome.
Cross has been unusually quiet.
Yeah, so Jabs, thanks for providing that context. I am by and large aligned with you, and this was always going to happen. It was only a matter of time. And how it ends, anyone's guess. I would dwell a bit. So because we are aligned so much on how we think this came about, I would dwell a bit about what I think other powers and interests should do and how they should perceive this. If Iran falls, then that will be a big blow to the emerging multipolar world. If Iran falls, the next target will be Turkey, and then China. Because if you think about West Asia, aka the Middle East, the big population groups there are the Arabs, the Persians, and the Turks. With history, with culture, with philosophy, with civilization. And from a strictly geopolitical perspective, population, geography, history, these are the groups that when they come together can exert influence and deter foreign hegemons. And so from, again, strictly geopolitical perspective, what's the role of Israel there? Israel is an armed ethnic minority, an ethno-state, used to perpetuate, again, from a geopolitical perspective. The other perspective, of course, another perspective is that Israel is a sanctuary state for survivors of European Jews that had been murdered. It is a sanctuary state for close to 1 million North African and Middle Eastern Jews that were expelled from the Middle East. So there are many layers to see what Israel is. But again, from the geopolitical play, I keep emphasizing that because I see the other perspectives as well. It's an armed ethnic minority used in a cold, calculated, and amoral way to keep control. And I think the key word is cold, calculated, amoral. So whoever the thinkers in the Brookings Institute 16 years ago that sat down to write that paper that appeared today to be policy, they talked about an option that includes allowing Israel to attack and deferring retaliatory strikes on Israel and American interest. It shows those people do not have Israel in itself, Israel's interest at heart. The overarching interest is the interest of America, who they were hoping that will adopt their policy paper. So these are psychopaths. These are narcissists. These are Machiavellian people. And the key thing to them is control, hegemony, profit, to be at the center of things. It does not matter who or what they sacrifice, including Israel, at a level. When their interests align, then Israel is a tool, a proxy, a beloved ally. But when it doesn't, as we have seen in the early parts of the Trump administration, with throwing Europe under the bus, with saying he wanted to take over Canada as a 51st state, at the point where interests don't align, they will separate from you and will be emotionless about it. And then you find all the ally, the only democracy in the Middle East, to be psychopathic rhetoric that only serves self. So I found it interesting when you were highlighting that option that says we support Israel to do it so that the Iranian retaliation is on Israel rather than us. I saw that come out. Now, back to the point before I lose my trail. What are the possible implications if Iran falls? Turkey will be next. Bibi has said that clearly. He wants to be a regional hegemon. He wants to reshape the Middle East. This isn't about survival. It's about domination. This is geopolitics. So, and if Turkey falls, then Russia, China are up for grabs. And I say this because I want our listeners to begin to look at the various layers of realities in this matter. On the most basic level, for whatever reasons, Israel is a sovereign state. It has rights. It needs to defend itself. It was attacked on October 7th. I concede that. I see that. And one of the things we have to do when we analyze these matters is to show strategic empathy. Try and put yourself in somebody else's shoes. Before that, the Palestinians are a native population. 5 million of them, 2 million in exile, cannot return home. They have a right to resist. They have a duty to resist. That's another level of it. And resistance can take many forms. So again, so that our viewers know, there's the BDS, there's civil disobedience, there's strike, and there's armed resistance. And in law, in culture, these are encoded in law. They are legal and they are recognized by law. So it's not illegal to resist. And then there is Iran, who even a lot of people talk about the Shah being in the pocket of the US before the current regime came to power in 79 with their Islamic revolution. I think that's a slight mischaracterization, because the Iranian as a people are an ancient people, and in whatever form they are, they will also seek to assert hegemony. And so, again, the complexity of geopolitics is that from a big power perspective, Iran is a victim as well as a perpetrator.
There are no good guys or bad guys.
Yes.
That's how I say it.
So while it is actively, and I see the difference between the Iran as the West as irreconcilable. So while it's actually seeking sovereignty, okay, deterring the West, economic sovereignty, technological sovereignty, political sovereignty, building alliances along those lines, and has been so since it came to power in this current regime came to power in 1979, and has been under attack by the West. The moment they came to power, Saddam was encouraged to invade them months into the current regime. Assassinations since the 2000s, sabotage, color revolutions. They have also set out to build hegemony too. And in fact, when you listen, because I troll social media a lot in the Middle East, many people actually see them as hegemons as well. So it's that complex. But today it's Iran, Israel, and I agree with you completely. They are fighting for sovereignty. This has all been coming, and the implications is, because of the implication I see, it will be foolish, either covertly or overtly, for the likes of Turkey, China, Russia, Pakistan, not to support in whatever way they can the Iranian campaign or defense or whatever, however this plays out, because the next steps will be these groups. As it stands, I call them the family-run Arab Gulf states. are all vassals in the pocket of the West. There is no sovereign Arab country. Jordan, Qatar, Bahrain, they're all family run, which means they are monarchies, which means they are inherently weak, which means one color revolution, they are gone. I commented elsewhere that the barrage of bombs that dropped on Iran and Israel in the last 2 days, drop them on any of these Arab Gulf states and the government will fall. But the people will free themselves. So they can't do anything. They've got no sovereignty. They are not in the play at all. So it's up to the Turks and the Persians in West Asia and the wider global south, which is the majority of the population of the world, China, Russia, India, to come together and recognize that, to put it bluntly, from a geopolitical perspective, we need to topple the last 300-400 years of human history. We do need to topple it. Then we deal with the next hegemon. And as Yemi said, they are no good guys. But hegemony and total control is not good. And what is this all about? Why is control so crucial to the empire? The Bab al-Mandab Strait, the Strait of Hormuz, and the Suez Canal. They link half of the world population in the east with the northern hemisphere, Europe, and those that are wealthy and can buy. And controlling these trade routes means you control trade, you exert rent from them, and then the region is also resource rich. This is all it's about. It's about capitalism, about control, and it's about wealth. I think that's it from me. I'll let others speak.
Cross.
Interesting conversation. I think I've got a slightly different slant on this one. One of the things that I found interesting was I think, funny enough, as much as I'm not really necessarily a conspiracy theorist, and I do think that that piece that you shared with us, Jab, is really conspiracy theory. Not because it isn't true in some elements, but then there's the risk of doing what Yemi was pointing out.
I'm still going to come back to that, and that's what I am going to talk about next. Okay. But
sure,
yeah,
I won't delve too much into it. Then I'll just give that slight piece around. The fact that there's a bit of correlation around that does not necessarily mean
it doesn't mean anything
or anything.
And we need to point that out, right? It's very important for our viewers to know that.
Yes, I think that's very important to point out. I'll state that as well. That in itself is not proof that the future is going to be what is written in that document either. I think that's key. So that's the first part. The second thing I think I find quite interesting is we often because there's a few different ways to talk about this, and this is a very sensitive topic. And I also point out this is a sensitive topic on YouTube, so I'm going to be very careful with the words I use, because Israel particularly isn't a country that or isn't a topic that a lot of people are comfortable talking about. But I think there are two things that come to mind. One is with the actual influence of Israel itself, and then the second part is about the goals and objectives. So you, Farouk, were talking a little bit about, say, the next step is to take down Turkey, which I don't necessarily think that's going to be the case. And I'll tell you why in a second. Well, apart from the fact that Turkey is the EU's 5th largest trading partner, where there's billions of euros at stake if Israel starts attacking, who is officially an ally of the EU, who is an ally of them. And if you've noticed,
sorry to interject. So when I say the next target will be Turkey, I'm not talking of kinetic war. I'm talking of the group you would then target to undermine, to sanction, to stop their growth, to stifle their development. Because they are a population group, they have influence and history, they will naturally exert influence. So I'm not talking about war. It may well get there if other means don't work. They've not bombed UAE, Qatar, Saudi Arabia to take them over. They've only supported puppets to maintain their control. So they may well do that in Turkey. And we saw that when Erdogan came and wanted to begin to assert and reclaim sovereignty, how coups and counter coups and accusations of being a dictator over his 20 years. I mean, he's an autocrat. So there are many models. When I say the next target, so even I say Russia is a target, it might just be about taking out Putin and putting a puppet there who will do what they say. So there are many models to exerting control over a people. And the cheapest one is what they've done in Egypt or Jordan or UAE. So that's what I mean. I wanted to address that. And I'm talking for many years. So that's what I meant.
Okay, that's fine. So essentially, do some kind of subterfuge to create some kind of, because really, and this is another thing I was going to talk about, the purpose of what Israel has been doing. Israel is well renowned for not having a lot of friends in the Middle East. They've got 5 at most, right? They've got Egypt, they've got Jordan, fundamentally UAE, and 2 others I can't really remember off the top of my head now. But they're in a position where I think that their purpose or their aim is to become the geopolitical power in the Middle East, because they can't afford not to. That's my opinion about it. If they do allow or permit others to be able to oppress them or to get more powerful than them, if they allow Iran to become a nuclear armed country, they are putting themselves at risk, and they realize that, because Iran has more strategic partnerships within the Middle East, can proliferate that technology across the Middle East, and which could lead to their own demise as a country. And I think another, just very briefly, another important thing is about how much of this is the US sticking its hand through Israel and making it do its bidding. I think I've been coming to the more recent opinion that it's the other way around. When you start looking through the history of Israel's partnership and how they've evolved the strategic powers, it gets quite interesting when you start looking at the different ways they've been able to do it. There's lots of rumors and lots of different ideas about how Israel essentially fundamentally controls the media, which you look through some very big names of the Murdochs and a few of the other ones, the Soroses from the financial perspective, etc. You'd hear about these things. Don't know how true they are, etc. I'm not putting any stock in any of this. In terms of the validity or the extent of control that they have, but it doesn't change the fact that a lot of the institutions, especially in these areas, do seem to have quite a significant amount of Israeli influence. And whether it's formal, whether it's unofficial, whether it's by chance or luck, it just seems to be the case. In terms of the strategic powers, they've been able to build quite a lot of good militaristic capabilities over the past couple of years. Since 1967, they've been doing a good job of being able to take on wars. They've done the strategic, the nuclear, what's that thing that they've called it now? Nuclear non-alignment or something like that, where they're not saying that they're nuclear armed, but they are, but maybe they're not, but maybe they're not. At the same time, trying to attack other countries like Iran, who have a very similar sort of position. They've focused quite a lot on diplomatic realignments as well. Since the Second World War, they've really focused on building a reputation with the key strategic partners, where they've been particularly successful in countries like the US, with NATO, what they've been able to establish, most of the Western countries that are nuclear armed and the most socioeconomically powerful countries in the world. And they've done a fantastic job of putting themselves on side. Just look at what the UK was saying just today. Just today, the Chancellor was talking about the fact that the UK is going to have to send some jets to protect their assets in the region, and did not necessarily rule out sending ground troops if need be. Think about that. That the fact that there's a country in the Middle East that's able to command that kind of power from us, for whatever reason, and this wasn't even on the basis of NATO. This is them.
I will let Ijabla tell you the reason. Because I know he has a lot to say.
I'm going to have a few. Yeah, I know. There's one.
Yeah, and then I'll add to that, because we've been having conversations around this earlier today. Elsewhere.
This is because this is something I haven't, and this is a good conversation, because I don't really have this conversation with a lot of people. So I'm really keen on learning. This is one of those ones I really want to learn a bit more, as most of it has been self-studied. And then they especially with the diplomatic influence, things like APAC in America, they're able to actually influence American policy, and we see that in the responses that are being done, even by people like Trump, who are known to be almost deviants from the standard expectations, still seem to kowtow to the Israeli whims and Israeli views, which I find very interesting. And then the final thing is the tech. They've really focused on tech. They've done that, whether through, again, some subterfuge, they've been able to build that information, the technology, through spying, or just generally building the technological infrastructure and capabilities. But currently, at the moment, 15% of the GDP comes from technology. If you think about a country that's able to do that, that is fantastic. They've strategically positioned themselves to be global players, and they are not going to take the back seat in that area, because they want to be the geopolitical leaders of the Middle East. And I think that's their motivation for me. That's my thoughts.
Thanks, Cross. If I may just make some very quick comments as well, and then probably not as extensive as any of yours. I don't disagree with much of what's been said, and I think I have to clarify my position, because it's sometimes quite important. You can make a very good point, but fall on technicalities that are extremely important. And people might say it doesn't matter to certain people. For some of us who like to think about real clarity of thoughts, I think it matters. When you, and so I'm not disagreeing with the premise that this is US policy. It is. I mean, what other proof do you need about this being US policy than that is what they are saying and doing, right? This is what I mean. That is US policy. So I don't disagree with it. What I'm saying though is when you say that you know something, there are two things that have to be interrogated. I mean, go to any basic philosophy class, you get told this. So two things have to be interrogated. The first thing is the nature of what you say you know. Okay, I know that the earth is round, right? And, you might be able to explain what that means and nobody disagrees with that. And then I might follow that up and say, someone might follow that up and say, how do you know that? I might say something like, because my grandmother said so. Now, if I challenge that point, I am not saying that the earth isn't round. Do you see the point? I'm saying that your grandmother thinks so has nothing to do with the earth being round. They're two different things. And so sometimes people get a bit carried away as well because you're challenging this. I think you disagree with what they're saying. Of course not. The two issues here, I completely agree. I'm just saying it has nothing to do with your mom saying it, frankly, or your grandmother saying that. It is government policy. We can see it is acting out. Yes, it may just happen that your grandmother also says that. Fair enough, but that doesn't prove that the earth is round. And that's precisely what I'm saying. There are hundreds of think tanks. They all say different things. Sometimes it'll align with government policy. I can bring you all kinds of think tanks in the UK that say all kinds of things all the time. Randomly, sometimes they'll align with government policy. Sometimes they won't. Government considers them, but just because one aligns with the government policy doesn't. I think we're making too much of that. That's all I say. The second point I have a slight pushback against is this idea that Israel is just America is just the puppet master pulling the strings. Israel that is not. It's almost evidently false. That there is an element of what I call, I don't want to say, of what I call an healthy cooperation between them sometimes in inflicting some of these conflicts. But I do think Israel also, as I think Cross has pointed out, does have a strong stake. So what you're having here is a sort of synergistic relationship where, of course, America is the big boss and calls all the shots, but Israel has a strong say in what's happening. And they have not just a strong say, they have a strong interest, and they have a strong stay. They have very, very active lobbies. They have well-wishers within the American institution that actually look after Israel. And also their adversaries in the Middle East, I don't consider them to be the good guys. So what I see here is a conflict, as I think has been mentioned by others, for domination. And I think that's how I choose to see this. What is happening is Israel, through America's might and the Western might, are imposing severe punishment on, in many cases, innocent people, like what we see is happening in Gaza. My support for those people in Gaza, for example, is purely out of a humanitarian. This should not be happening to anyone under any circumstance. Okay, but I put it to you that there are interests within that estate as well, that if you turn the tables around, there is no guarantee that you may not get mayhem in the opposite direction. And I think Israel is aware of that. And I think, again, we need to be able to say this without...
Yemi, can I ask you a question?
Yes.
When the Nazis were killing European Jewry and attempting to exterminate them, might it be plausible that there will be segments or elements within, say, the Warsaw Ghetto, that if the tables were turned around, will do the same thing?
100%. I'm not saying that justifies anything. Again, this is where this discussion becomes. I don't even know why this question is even remotely necessary at all. Because this is what you know the answer. Of course there are.
I know the
and I've made it clear. I said nobody.
Wait, I know the
Let
answer.
me just make my point clear. I've said
Wait, I know the
nobody should
answer.
suffer this
I know
fate
the
under
answer, but
any
I'm conscious.
circumstance.
Yeah.
I've said it.
No, I know the answer, but I'm conscious that we have an audience, and that this question will come in their mind.
Yeah.
So it's an opportunity for you to explain.
But did you hear me say that I stand in support against the suffering in Gaza because no humans under any circumstance should suffer this? Does that not answer the question you're asking me? Do you not think that comment answers that question comprehensively?
You've had the opportunity to re-emphasize and reiterate that
before you asked the question.
Hmm?
Yeah, I said it. So
I know you. I heard
my
you say
interest. So my interest. So let me explain to you how I view this. My own framework, and we all have different frameworks. So my framework is that of minimizing human suffering. Okay. So I look at Gaza, and I say this can't be allowed to happen. Right? I mean, there's no justifiable. You can't make any reason you can't give any background reason that can make me agree with you that this is justifiable. Does that make sense? Like, there's no reason, there's nothing. We can just look at the devastation there and say, no, this has to stop now. Okay, and this is how I look at it. Okay, so the point I'm making, I am not excusing, I am in the business of explaining. Okay, I am explaining Israel's. I'm explaining. Sorry, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so I think a lot has been said. I hope I can. Sorry, I haven't written notes, but I hope I can address all of them. Please let me know if there's any question that I leave outstanding. So I'll start maybe from your last point, Yemi, which is that if the tables were turned, other people are going to act the same way. You see, we hear this. Okay.
Just to clarify, I didn't say they were going to act the same way.
Okay, or they might act the same way.
I said there are elements within all of this, and I think even Farouk alluded to it, that, Iran, there's a quest for domination there. So, it's not, they're not neutral victims, right? They're not. Okay, and I'm not saying that justifies aggression against them. It doesn't.
No. We're not talking about justification. Okay, okay, maybe then I don't need to pursue that, because I got the impression that what you were saying was that if the tables were turned, the victims might act in the way that they've been treated currently.
That's an understandable fear of the Israelis. It is so I'm putting myself in their head to try to have some empathy. That's an understandable.
I don't think, if we start to say you can think about infinite possibilities. It's possible that, I don't know, maybe
if I had a gun, I'll shoot you.
Thank you. It's possible, but I don't go start killing you now, because I think that the infinite possibilities we can think about.
I think let's move on. This won't be productive.
Let's move on. That's not productive. So the point I want to make is that I think to understand the world as it is, you need to understand that the dominant economic philosophy on this planet today is capitalism, and that explains why the world is the way it is and why a lot of the things that we see are happening. So, and I keep saying, follow the money, follow the interest, and everything would make sense. So this is all about it, because capitalism is a system that rewards profit. It's all centered about profit, and in the drive for profit or greed, if you don't regulate it, the end result, predictably, 100% of the time, is going to be human suffering, or in fact, even ecocide. The planet dies. That's what's going to happen, and I call what the system that we have a global dictatorship, on top of that system sits America and its vassals, which, if you read the newspapers, they call them allies, but they are client states. America decides the policy, and these other guys help it to prop that system. So when we talk about unipolarity, which is a system that we're under, we are talking about this capitalist unipolar system, which the core, and by the core, I'm talking about the former colonial states, control. The rest of the world follows. And in that system, different regions of the world perform different functions. So if you come to Africa, for instance, people keep saying, oh, if we put Peter Obi or a different politician, we will get things going to be, the reason the country is really bad is because it's Tinubu who is there, or it's Jonathan who is there. That is why the country is like that. If we put a different person, we're going to get a different system. But it won't change, because you need to go back and look at the system and how the world is organized. In this capitalist system, it's a system of extraction. Somebody has to be doing the donkey job. And the people who have been designed to do this donkey job is Africa, right? So we have to provide the resources. That's our job in this. That's the role that has been assigned to us. We have to produce the raw materials. We have to produce the cheap labor. Okay, when these products have been processed, we are allowed some degree of prosperity so that we can buy the goods. So we become the markets, right? And the big population that we have really helps. What's the other thing that we need to do? In assigning, but it's also obsolete technology. So we are not allowed to produce high-end goods. And this is why you're getting all this fight between China and the US. Why? Because China is not happy just being the factory producing just low-end goods. They're no longer happy with that. So they want to produce high-end goods. They have the capacity to do that. And America, I'm going to say America, but when I say America, I'm talking about America and the West, says, no, you can't do that, because if you do that, you're going to eat into our profit. You're going to compete with us. You're going to create a parallel system. We cannot have a parallel system. This system has to stay the way it is. So this is how the world is structured. If you understand this, you will understand what is happening with Israel and Iran, and how the US is trying to contain Russia in using Ukraine, and also detour happening to China using Taiwan. You cannot say you respect a one China policy and Taiwan is part of China, and then you go there and start saying we're going to encourage all these secessionist forces to break away. It doesn't make sense, but it would start to make sense if you understand that the whole point is there is a system, a world order, a global order that has to be maintained at all costs. If you understand that, you can understand straight away that anybody who tries to deviate from the roles that have been assigned, that person is going to go. And that's the reason why if you have an African head of state or president or whatever it is, and he wants to restrict or restructure this system, he has to go. And they will look for excuses and say it's human rights abuse, or he's doing XYZ, but it doesn't matter. That individual has to go, but they have to get a pretext to permit this to happen. So
the subtext of what you're saying then, that the fight really, in terms of this segment, who's really fighting whom, it's not who, it's more about what's fighting what. And you're saying it's the systems that are conflicting rather than it being any specific individual.
No. So this is multipolarity versus unipolarity. By unipolarity, I'm talking about a system that is already established. A multipolar world says we want different people to do different things. We want common prosperity let everybody do their own thing. Let us all compete fairly.
So just to expand on that a bit, but I'll use a framework that Cross has used and that Yemi has touched on, and that Ijabla has said. So the battle,
borrowing things from everybody.
Yeah. So really,
what kind of history is that? Is that capitalism?
It's about order, hegemony. There is a global order led by America that its allies help implement.
So every time
Iran is roundly rejecting that order.
Yes. So every time they talk about international order, Farouk, just
totally rejecting that order. Economic, military, technological. It is saying, no, I have my own framework. I want my own framework. Essentially, in that context, they are fighting for freedom for themselves. It doesn't mean they will not oppress others. So it's like a husband.
Why do you have to say it doesn't mean they will not oppress others? Why is that important?
Because I'm going to that because it's possible that I want freedom for myself.
No, because that's exactly what he did to me with the
because that
exactly
gives me an opportunity to explain to the audience. Because it's possible that I can fight for my freedom and at the same time oppress my wife at home. Those two things can be true.
Hamas.
So when we're discussing geopolitics, it's Iran is not a saint per se. I called it a complex situation. But now that's one. Yemi touched on legitimate interest of Israel and how that aligns with America. Israel is many things. A sanctuary state created for European Jews that had been genocided in Europe, expelled from Europe, rejected from America and Britain as migrants, and the empire found land for them to move to. So it's a sanctuary state for European Jews. And then, consequent upon the public, became a sanctuary state for Arabic and North African Jews. Israel finds itself, therefore, in a hostile environment because of the circumstances of its founding, which it's not its fault. Nigeria did not cause how it was created. Neither did Jordan or Ghana or Covert. But circumstances happened, culminated in the Second World War. You had millions of people killed, expelled, needed a place, and that believed that a state would be the only thing that will protect them. So, from that context, they are fighting for their lives. They are fighting for their very survival. So, cut out America, cut out the West.
I think sometimes we forget that too much and just say, "Oh, it's America." That's just.
So,
they are fighting for their own survival.
What are these people doing? So we're going back to the generation that were expelled just before, during, and after the Second World War. What are they doing? Just like I said with Iran, and I give example with myself, I can be fighting for freedom, but at the same time oppressing my wife. So in fighting for their survival, they're imposing a brutal appetite and occupation, committing war crimes, and projecting the fear that a lot of all these things will come back to them on their victims, and being unable to therefore accept being caught in a mentality of perpetual war.
So can I just comment? Can I just say something very quickly, because it's very important that there's nothing you've said here that suggests or will make me even think for a second that you're supporting Israel's actions, because you clearly are not. No. You're just explaining how we find ourselves in a dangerous situation where everyone's frightened of everyone, and you have to be able to put yourself in the mind of the other person to be able to.
I don't want to lose my trail here. So I started from saying there's hegemony that is being implemented by allies, but remember, Israel has its interest, which is existential to it. That's how it perceives it: surrounded, besieged, almost snuffed out in Europe, rejected in America and Britain, and now there's a sanctuary. To their minds, it doesn't matter what they are doing. When I clear a piece of land I bought to build my house, my castle, my idol, it doesn't matter the ants that I crush and the ant hills and the trees I uproot. That, in a sense, is how, unfortunately, the Palestinian cause has become from their perspective. Now, how does this then align with the American perspective? I think I've hinted at it before. You want control, you arm a minority. That's how monarchy works. Monarchy is a family with power controlling everybody. And dynastic rule. Apartheid, minority in power, deny everybody rights. And from the perspective of Machiavellian narcissistic psychopaths, what does that do? It puts you in the center of everything. Peacemaking, war, economics, conflict, politics. And that's what psychopaths want. That's what hegemons want. It's not about right or wrong. It's about control. Cross talked about the amazing influence of Israel in America and how they've built strategic partnerships. Correct. But a lot of this influence, particularly from America, are American interests, and they are just an alignment of interests. IPAC, 5 million strong, mainly American white evangelical Christians. 25 million strong evangelical voters in America at their height. That is more than the whole population of Jews in the world. There are more Christian Zionists than all the Jews in the world combined. And these people, for theological reasons, support Israel. So it's not about Israel. It's not about the Jews. It's about their beliefs. So that explains a lot of the influence.
So there's a religious element to all of this as well. Again,
there is a theological element to it.
When you mention this, people say, no, it's got nothing to do with religion. Of course, there's an element of it.
There are more Christian Zionists
yes.
than there are Jews in the whole world.
Yes. And they believe, so there's a part of their support that stems from their own theological understanding.
Theology.
Else out.
They don't see
theology.
They don't see human suffering.
Yeah.
They don't see justice. They don't see displacement. They don't even see democracy. I see a sanctuary for a people that have been genocided
does
in
that
Europe.
Element also exist within Palestine and Hamas of this? Again, I'm not don't ask me this question because I'm not asking you here. I'm saying
the simple answer to that is yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So
that's it.
So the simple answer to that is yes. We will do explaining perhaps in another episode. We're at 1 hour, almost at 1 hour. So Cross, when you talk about that influence of Israel on America, rather I see Americans projecting their interest through Israel. It may seem illogical at first. I will trace it to 3 broad things. First, I've touched on theological support and the fact that by sheer numbers alone, there are just more Christians than so just more Christians that believe Israel should exist than there are Jews alive in America. 2, America is a democracy. When you look at the trends, up until recently, it's declining now. White evangelicals are the most motivated political groups. They turn out for elections more. So therefore, they decide elections more. And what do politicians do? They are in the business of getting to power and remaining in power. And what will they do? They will pander to groups that can vote them in. In the UK, we have the triple lock. All politicians are pandering to pensioners. They love them. They are rich. They are influential. So people lobby. And in democracies, leadership responds to the populace because they want to get into power and remain in power. So that explains a lot of the influence. 2, European Jews who migrated to America. When persecution of European Jewry began, scientists, businessmen, peasants all went to America, sought opportunity, and have become very, very influential. And a lot of them are Zionists too. And Zionism here has different meanings. At the most basic level, for the purpose of this conversation, what I take it to mean when I say Christian Zionist and I say Jewish Zionist is just that belief that Jews should have their own state, their own country, in a land they believed they originated from. So that's what I mean. So these people became very, very successful, again, in a democracy. Bankers, billionaires, techpreneurs, and so they lobby. That's the second level of interest. And that explains the influence Cross talked to. And I think the third one is the interest of the empire. How do I situate myself in this situation to put me at the center? So Machiavelli, you want to be. Think about America in the Middle East. When there's a peace talk, is there. When there's war, is there. When there's diplomacy, is there. When there is even when there is aid to genocided Palestinians, is America. That's a narcissist. You feed somebody, you kill them, you cause war, you cause peace. And all that does is, from a psychopathic viewpoint, puts you at the center of everything. You are amoral. And how do they perpetuate that in a tribal region? Yeah, I'm a minority.
So it's capitalism.
So yes, Yemi, you're right. Israel has and survival. Survival is one of the most fundamental human instincts. And I think that's why they are fierce, they are competent, and they are lethal. They have to survive. But then the empire then uses them in that way. And the so-called Israeli influence on America, I see it through the framework of they have a strong need to survive. Yemi, if I am doing something and my fundamental premise is survival, and that aligns with your interest, you will do almost anything for me to make me survive. But it doesn't mean that your interest is my survival. I don't know if you get my point.
No, absolutely. Yeah.
That's how I see that relationship.
It's a complex web. Again, so everything you said here.
That's how I see that relationship. And that's how I see that influence. And as I said earlier, whenever that influence doesn't align, the empire will eat you, will throw you under the bus.
Yeah. So
without a doubt.
Can I expound a bit on what Farouk has just said? So I think, for me, I think that the point that I want to emphasize is your last point about what the empire wants. And again, what is the empire? The empire is centered on capitalism, what I've tried to explain. Now, there are different ways to look at Israel. You know, one way is to think of it as a settler colonial project, in the same way that the US was established, and Canada and Australia and South Africa, right? So that's one way to think of it, because it's important to you mentioned Zionism. It's not the same thing as Judaism, because Judaism is a religion. From my understanding, and this is also why you would find that the strongest critics of Israel are actually Jews, right? And in that religion, there is no, from what I understand, that understanding that the Jews need a homeland or a state isn't really something that is enshrined in the religion. But this is how the Zionists.
Just to add there, the notion of nationalism is fairly recent in human history.
Recent, that's correct. Yeah.
Arabism, German nationalism, it's all new. Yes. It all evolved recently.
Yes. So, but that idea, this idea of the Jewish state, is something that the Zionists have proposed. And if you look back to documents by the founder of Israeli state, name escapes me just now, you will see where it mentions that essentially they're trying to learn from how the apartheid state of South Africa was formed. Okay, so this is what the Zionist Israel, in a sense, is a Zionist project. That's how I understand it. But there is alignment, because what the Europeans have done, because remember, America wasn't that powerful at this point in time, but obviously, it was the British, the French, and in fact, I think they had some support from USSR, I believe, at that point in sort of forming Israel. So, but that project, there is alignment, because, like Farouk said, and again, like I've said it many times, what we live under is a global hegemony or global dictatorship. The empire is everywhere, and it's very important for the empire to have a settler project.
To have proxies, call them what they are, proxies.
Yeah, essentially to have a colonial outpost in the Middle East, which has obviously persisted. Others have collapsed, like South Africa has collapsed. we can debate this another day whether apartheid in South Africa has actually gone or whether it's just kind of morphed. But that's a conversation for another day. So if you understand it that way, then you would see why the US, Britain, UK, the usual, international community would be invested in making sure that the Zionist state of Israel thrives in the Middle East because it serves their geopolitical interests. Because, like we said, this isn't about good or bad. It's about the control of resources because, after all, that's what they want. If you control anybody, in fact, it's said that anybody who controls Iran and, sort of West Asia controls the world because Asia is absolutely massive. And those countries, the West Asia, Central Asia, they connect the east to the west, essentially. So it really is very important. And that's why Israel cannot be allowed to fail as a project, because how else would America exert its influence in that area?
Just mindful of time, just wondering if we can consider a couple of things. So the role of Africa in all of this.
Yeah, so
where do we see this going next? How does this all pan out? What happens if this turns into full-scale war or it all blows up?
So I think this whole system is designed, the fight that we're seeing, as I understand it, is to end multipolarity. Well, I won't say end, is to stop it from fully evolving. I think that's what it is. So if we go back to the era of unipolarity, Yemi, your guess is as good as mine. What do you think is going to happen to Africa?
No hope. We are where we are. Absolutely no hope.
No hope.
The landscape is only changing because we've got alternatives. We can negotiate. There are different systems forming, loans, technology, information, basic information for us to process and have situational awareness.
Yeah.
So, imagine where we were in a bubble.
Farouk, 1 second. If anything, it's going to get worse. And the reason
it's going to get worse
is because
if multipolarity fails, we're going back into the cocoon we were, where we did not even have situational awareness, because what we imbibe and what we understood and who we loved, who we hated was determined by others.
Yes, but what I'm saying by is going to be worse is because Europe, and look at what's happening in the Sahel. They're kicking out France, right? They're kicking out France. They're kicking out, they're saying shut down all these American bases. We've got South Africa there trying to drag Israel to the international court. So they are thinking, good graves, these guys have grown some balls. They've got some, we can see what they can do if they have some power. It's not like they don't already know these things, but actually they're seeing a taste of what can happen if Africa becomes independent. So I think that there's going to be a system that we're just going to make sure that they put us in this basket, they cover it and sellotape, whatever, properly seal it so that there is no escape at all.
So what's Africa's role? What should we be doing?
1 second. Remember before this war in Ukraine broke out, do you guys remember all the talk about green transition and all that? Who's talking about green transition now? Suddenly, because China is doing so well in terms of like green energy transition, right? They can't compete now, so they need fossil fuel. So now nobody's talking about fossil fuel. In fact, they're going to Africa and saying to Nigeria, can you please dig pipeline now to supply? Nobody's talking about that. So that green transition itself was a means of making sure that the trap was even further. They were saying you can't use fossil fuel to develop yourselves, right? You're telling this to people who cannot eat, who cannot drink, who haven't got money, who haven't got millions are dying, millions of children in poverty, right? You're saying we can't use fossil fuel to develop our countries, but suddenly now you don't have fossil fuel. You're like, oh, can you please start digging pipelines, please, so that you can supply us with so this is how the system works. This is what I keep saying. Please understand, if you understand how this world is structured, everything will make sense, and it's all about the profit. It's all about the control.
I think Cross might want to say something, but I'll if I get the chance, I'll comment on some of those points. But yeah, Cross.
I think for me, there's a couple of key things that matter. I'm looking at this, going back to the main question of what happens if this blows up. I think the idea of Iran is seen almost as the pillar at this point of Islam in the Middle East. Let's move Saudi Arabia out of it because they almost seem a little bit sold out. They're almost quite focused on capitalism. They focus on their oil trade, selling all that stuff, etc. I think Iran is seen more from that ideological perspective of being, if Iran is beaten, then Islam is basically being beaten, and Israel and the Zionist argument and Christianity, etc., has won. I think there are 5 key things. So I was just taking a few notes while we we're talking about this. Some interesting things came up from the conversation. The first thing is what's going to happen to us from a trade perspective. Obviously, we're going to start having challenges with trade, which is going to be a big problem for us. We're quite heavily export dependent and import dependent as well in Africa. And there are going to be implications on trade, particularly looking through that Red Sea route. But so I'm talking about Africa, from a general perspective, but even outside the actual general logistics around shipping and moving things across the world, we have the issue of the ideological spillover. Even before that, we will now start being forced to choose sides, especially countries like Nigeria, for example, which are nearly 50-50 splits of Christianity and Islam. We'll start having the issue of, well, what side are you on? Are you on the side of Christianity? Are you on the side of the Jews? Are you on the side of Islam, or the Iranians and the Iranian allies? Because the Middle East is also going to have to openly choose sides if this starts escalating to that point, which can start having lots of implications. We've seen effects of this in Nigeria as well. These ideological spillovers from things like Al Qaeda into what do we have again it was Boko Haram, wasn't it, back in the day, which was essentially trying to see itself as a follow-off offshoot from ISIS, which was following on from Al Qaeda, etc. So there's the whole concept of the ideological spillovers that could start to affect us, especially from a Christian/Muslim perspective.
That could start to affect us, or that is already affecting us. Sorry,
I don't think it's affecting us that. I don't think it's affecting us that strongly. So we've seen elements of the Muslim-focused ideological piece, but not the conflict between Christianity and Islam. What we've seen is that that Shia Sunni sort of approach, or the inter-religious perspective. But now this is going to be an inter-religious conflict that we're going to have to deal with, because we're choosing sides between both. And that's not just from an ideological perspective, and we'll be forced to choose sides as well from a political perspective as well, because I imagine, this is my expectation as well, with China, Russia, etc., choosing the Axis versus the Allies sort of perspective. That's how I'm seeing things. We're going to have, outside the Middle East, external countries having to also pick sides, which could affect our abilities for trade, political interventions, our ability to receive foreign direct investments. All of that could consequently result from this escalation. The fourth one is the clear one that we don't often really think about around the economic shockwaves would be wild, especially like a country like Nigeria. When we're dealing with oil, where's oil generally? What is the general concept of oil? It's the Middle East fundamentally that supplies the vast majority of it, and we are highly import dependent in terms of the processed oil, but we're also petrol, all the processed outputs from oil, but we're also heavily export dependent in terms of getting this oil to be refined. Although we're trying to change this now with new refineries, etc. But we know the infrastructural state. Inflation will go through the roof. Foreign direct investment will be impacted. Again, going over all these things that we're talking about with the political affiliations having to choose sides. And Nigeria is heavily reliant on Nigeria in particular, but generally Africa. We're quite heavily reliant. We're not self-sufficient. We rely too heavily on external factors to support how our economies run. And the final part is just is general. We've kind of talked about this from the African perspective and how there would be potentially conflict within Africa itself. But there's going to be tensions outside, because people generally are going to start choosing sides, very similar to what we're already seeing now anyway. And we've had some of the things with the migrants, non-migrants. Some people are complaining about Islam, not Islam, parts of that, etc. But I think this is going to also spill over into people having to choose sides. Are you pro-Israel? Are you pro-Zionist? Are you not? Are you for freedom, or whatever it is, the moniker that they'll use at that point in time? So I think there'll be lots of ideological.
I posted the result of poll that was done recently, Nigeria has one of the highest rates of support for Israel around the world. I think they polled about 20 countries. But I wanted to make Kenya. Kenya was higher than Nigeria. But I wanted to make a quick comment about sort of my broad understanding about this geopolitics vis-a-vis a lot of the comments have been made by Jab and Farouk. These guys know a lot more about me. And I'm not saying this because they're here, or this is a fact, right? About the historical context and even contemporary events. I think they follow it more keenly than I do. And so, but having said that, I learn a lot from, how they present these cases. There's absolutely nothing they've said tonight that I disagree with. Absolutely nothing. But what I would point out, particularly with Jab, is that despite the fact that I agree with everything that you've said, it seems strange sometimes when I push back, and I'll tell you where my pushback is coming from, because it's a strange type of pushback where you actually agree with everything someone is saying, but you're still finding yourself compelled to push back. And where that compulsion is coming from is this. I'll explain to you, because I find myself in that sort of situation, not just with you, I find it fairly frequently. So what is happening is that I see that you're very well educated on this subject, but you seem to be very keen to take one perspective of it, which is very correct. No problem with it. I have no problem with it, but it's just one perspective of it. So I'll explain what I mean by that. So we're looking at the geopolitics and what's happening from the US's point of view. This is what the US is doing, which is true. I can see it. I can see it as you're explaining it. All the dots join up. But there's also other perspectives within that. And we get into this all the time. For example, when we talk about the Fulani herdsmen crisis in Nigeria, again, I get into this trouble because when I'm trying to say, right, I agree, there's, religious element. There are people who believe they want to jihad Nigeria and carve it to there are people who believe that. But there are also other perspectives of what's going on. There's desertification, there's urbanization, there's fighting for resources. And none of those contradict each other. Do you see where I'm coming from here? So what I am saying to you is, even though I agree totally about the US's perspective and how they're looking at this, that this is what they're doing. There's no doubt about that. There are other perspectives. There's the Iranian perspective. There's the Israeli perspective. There is the Russian perspective. There are other different perspectives that are all kind of turn into a mismatch where we can just begin to unpack them a little bit more. But there's absolutely nothing you've said that I disagree with. I can say it. I can, as you're explaining it, it makes perfect sense. It is what it is.
So I'll jump in here. What's in it for Africa? And my framework is simple. We've discussed this before. This takes us back to one of our earliest episodes. What are the opportunities and risks for the emerging multipolarity? This is a battle of wits, a test of wills, an attempt to roll back multipolarity. So we potentially could lose out on all of the benefits of multipolarity. And there are many: technological, economic, financial, political, diplomatic, freedom. Those were the opportunities we discussed. They could all vaporize for another few generations if the emerging multipolarity is toppled. And I don't need to explain to Africans what the consequences of that would be, because the consequences of that have been the last 300 years, 400 years, when they cooled slavery, when that became costly colonization, when we rose and fought back or they weakened imperialism. We are weak. We are divided. And when you are weak and divided, your best bet is that your oppressors fight and weaken themselves. Not necessarily fight, struggle and weaken themselves. Because then that creates opportunities for you to begin, to grow, to develop, and free yourself from the chains, from the ropes. In the last 40 years, for the first time since colonial times, go and check this out. Africa has had new railroads, new ports, new airports. The Nigerian moribund and dead railway system has been resuscitated in the last 10, 15 years. Kenya, Nigeria has the only deep sea port in West Africa. Kenya, South Africa, North Africa, Ethiopia has the Grand Renaissance Dam, all from Chinese funding. If the Chinese did not emerge on the landscape, I don't need to explain what would have happened, because the alternative is the last 300 years. Multipolarity has risks. Sorry, multipolarity has risk, which is more conflict, as we are seeing in Ukraine and Russia, between Iran and Israel. But as people far under the radar, able to avoid direct conflict, I think the opportunities are more than the risks. We recently saw the skirmish between India and Pakistan, Operation Sindoor. We saw how the Pakistanis, although unconfirmed, use Chinese technology to deter the attack. Now we are seeing Iranian technology fight out cutting-edge US technology. These things are not available to us. Goodluck Jonathan, at the height of Boko Haram, at the height of the Boko Haram conflict in 2014-15, wanted to buy arms. And what did the Americans say? No, we cannot sell to you because of supposed human rights abuses of the Nigerian army. The same US government is funding the crimes we are watching in Gaza.
Which whatever the Nigerian army does is child's play compared to that. Like,
compared to what we are seeing in Gaza.
Child's play.
And how does multipolarity help us? We can go to China and say, sell us arms for our national interest. That's the opportunity we would lose if multipolarity is rolled out. We can go to Turkey and say, we can go to Iran and say, sell us drones. We need to hunt these Boko Haram chaps. And then we don't get all the Hippocratic human rights things that we now know is pure hypocrisy. When our national interest, our national integrity is in line, we are told that there's an amnesty report, there's a Human Rights Watch report, but when that of Israel is in line, we are told we'll sanction the ICC, you are anti-Semitic, because it's not in line with American interests. So that's the first thing we'll lose if multipolarity goes. Capital for the kind of projects we've talked about. Okay? Friends, trade routes. Hitherto, in the system that existed before China emerged, we go for a loan to build a refinery that we need. We are told you must change your.
Okay, if I can throw a question, because I think
you must change your laws. You must do this and that. So yes, we stand to lose a lot.
What do African leaders and societies need to do then to stand a good chance to kind of make the best of what is a dangerous situation? What should the President Tinubu's or the Captain Traore's or the President Ruto's of this world, what should they be doing?
I think, again, we covered an episode on Traore and how he's become a mythical figure, a Superman for the African dream.
I'm not focusing on him. Just
yes, I think his approach is dangerous, is risky, and is probably counterproductive. We don't at where we are now. If I had leadership, we don't need to become resistance fighters just yet. We need to engage with every opportunity across the spectrum, ruthlessly focusing on our own interests. We need development, education, healthcare, and wherever we get it from at the least cost, because there will always be a cost. That's what we should be exploring. And that seems to me to be something that Tinubu is doing. I don't endorse all he does, but I see him in Paris and the UK. I also see him in China. I see him in Turkey. I see him in Saudi Arabia. I see him engaging across board. And I hope his fundamental driver is the interest of the 220 million Nigerians he leads. That's how Africa should engage in this landscape.
I'll be keen to hear what Jab thinks about that.
Avoid conflict, have broad engagement, and have your personal interest, your national interest, right in front of you. This is not time to. I mean, you can take moral stands. We can take moral stands for things like the rule of law, multipolarity, UN conventions. We should. And the reason we should is that as weak people, it is the law that can protect you. If we foolishly side with the strong or side with might, that is a strategic blunder. Because the day Germany wants us, they will take us. The day France wants us, they will take us. The day the strong wants us, they will take us. So it's strategically foolish as a weak person, for whatever reason, to err on the side of tyrants. So we should support multilateralism, the rule of law, have broad engagement, and focus on our national interest, self-sufficiency. And then we claw back sovereignty slowly. Thank you.
Jab, you find yourself as the president of Kenya or Zimbabwe or Nigeria or Togo, whatever. What are you doing to make the best of a dangerous situation?
Yeah. So for me, based on everything that I have explained about how the world works, there is no other solution. That there's only a Pan-African solution. That's the way I would say it. I think that I agree with Farouk, which is that when you are a country of, I don't know how many people are in Senegal, say you got 5 million people. How are you going to compete with a country like India that has 1 billion people? Please just tell me.
It's got no chance.
Right? So there's no chance.
And
then you're going to compete with a country like China that is 1 point something billion people. How can you do that? Right? But all of Africa, you've got 1.4 billion people. If that
stand a chance.
Yes. So if you unite and you integrate yourselves militarily, economically, military technology, develop your own system. So this, when we talk about multipolarity, we're talking about developing your own system, following a sovereign state. Unless we do that, I genuinely can't see, like Farouk said, they will just come today and just pick you one by one. That's what they're going to do. That's what they've actually always done. And they actually also do realize that our strength is in our unity. And they've done everything. Again, I know you're going to say that I'm always talking US and that kind of thing, but they've done it.
No, you're still correct anyway. Okay. I think.
Okay. Historically, they have worked to undermine that unity because they know that if we come together, that is the undoing of this system. So they won't let that happen. But now it's our duty. If we don't do it, only we can do it. If we don't do it, no one else is going to do it for us.
So what you will be thinking about is, having the conversations about African integration and cooperation.
Correct.
And that seems to be what you'll be prioritizing.
I am 100% with Ijabla on that. No reservations whatsoever.
Yeah, because this subject has been on the table as far back as 1960, in the 60s, when we're talking about the Organization of African Unity. And then you ended up having these two camps. And at the end of the day, you just had an organization in name, but didn't achieve much. So that's the way I see it. And Africa there is what used to be called the non-aligned movement, or the third world, right? And they had this meeting back in those days in Bandung and all of those kind of things. I think that Africa is largely non-aligned, kind of what Farouk is saying, which is that if you're in a weak place, don't commit to one force. Because I tell you what, if multipolarity fails, because in my mind, what I'm thinking is what these people are trying to do is we're going to deal with the big guys, first of all, that are in our way. If they get rid of China, get rid of Russia, and get rid of all these other people,
we go back 100 years.
Exactly. So people like Traore and all those kind of things, they will go.
That will finish them. So there's
no point now bordering with Traore, and he's not going to go, that much, because Russia is overextended where it is. It has to. This is why it allowed Syria to fall, because its priority for Russia, Ukraine is existential. It has to win this fight, right? So it cannot be distracted by any other thing going on outside that sphere of influence for now.
Fascinating. I just wanted to read very quickly a comment here from Kehinde Abu. Whilst both Israel and Iran claim to act in the interest of regional security and national defense, their actions often reveal deeply misaligned goals. Thanks very much. And I think he goes ahead to say, this was a fascinating episode. I truly enjoyed the discussion. So have I. I think we've kind of run out of time now, but I think I'll put Cross on the spot to say, there's been a lot of things we've said. Do you want to sort of have the last word, maybe summarize, what the sort of high points, and maybe, just however you've seen it,
I think for me, it's been quite insightful. It's been quite insightful because we've talked about things from a slightly different perspective. From, again, like I said, I haven't had this conversation with anybody, so this is the first time I've actually talked to individuals, especially this group, and I quite obviously enjoy the conversations because I always learn whenever we talk, which is not very often that I learn things with most conversations with most people. So, but with this, I've learned. I think my view has slightly shifted. But if more than anything, it's probably solidified a couple of things. And then the views that have shifted, I'll probably touch on as well. First, I think it's solidified and made very clear to me that I believe that more so than anything, Israel is more likely to be the hand in the glove rather than America being the hand in the glove. I think
I'm pleased we're able to shift that. And I hope that happened to our viewers as well, because it's something that is difficult to work out. I reflected a lot on that to try and make sense of facts before me. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
No worries. Because that's fine. I mean, and it's an interesting perspective as well when you start thinking about it, because even though you could look at that from the perspective of saying Israel is running all the machinations and doing all the things behind the scenes and is all powerful, etc., it really is symbiosis. I think where I ended up is symbiosis. We have a situation where these interests, like to your point, Faruqi, you raised this as well earlier about the interests align. And that alignment of interest has led to a sort of symbiosis where Israel is doing things that benefit them and Israel is doing things that benefit America.
You've got the gun runner, got the gun runner and the drug dealer.
Exactly. You know what I mean? They go hand in hand. It works quite well for both of them because it's a very symbiotic, which allows each of them to do things a little bit more than they usually would allow. So they're willing to accept additional behaviors or misbehaviors from the other side because their interest overall align.
You've read it well.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest takeaway, I think, from this conversation that I've gotten. I think the other thing that I found interesting as well is that...
I hope, sorry to interrupt, but when you say misbehavior, I hope you're not talking about, all right, you can kill just a few people.
You can do a genocide.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. I am literally saying
you can do a genocide to protect you.
Sorry?
Because that is actually a cultural thing. It's not let's just turn a blind eye. This is culture for the West. This is something that the West
I don't disagree. I don't necessarily agree either. I think there's evidence that there's multiple situations in which the West tends to take on a two-faced approach to this process, where some lives are more important than other lives, and some objectives supersede the importance of human existence. That we have multiple instances of this occurring, and the reality is,
consistently over 400, 500 years, genocide after genocide after genocide after genocide. It's not different.
It's human nature. Four legs good, two legs bad, and it became four legs good, two legs better. Do you know what I mean? It's just what it is, and it's how humans, even animals, everyone tends to work in terms of their own interest, and then tend to set a hierarchy. This is the reality. We've always set a hierarchy around how we perceive other people, and the other people we consider to be people, and there's others that we don't. And even though, I'm taking this to the barest bones of looking at human behavior at an aggregate. I'm not talking about this on an individualistic perspective. I'm talking about how, as societies over time, we have treated people. If slavery, slavery is the biggest example of this, and we have multiple different iterations of slavery across every single race that has existed in the world over the past 4, 5, 6, 7, almost 10,000 years. We have always treated people less, who we think are less, and we're willing to do things to them that we wouldn't do to others who we consider humans. It's just human behavior. It doesn't make it right. It's just something that there's evidence of. We've looked at over time. I think, and then the final thing for me is just understanding the things that we talked about the possible implications as well, and what we need to do. Listening again to the conversation that we've had, I've kind of come to the opinion as well that maybe in Africa, what we need to do really start thinking. Jab is going to love this, but we'll probably start thinking about how we can start aligning a little bit more towards that more Asian, that more Chinese approach, and stepping away from this unipolar, systematic power structure that is focused on the West. And it might be time for Africa and parts of Africa to start exploring, not necessarily moving there yet.
I think
You've made my day.
No.
You've made my day, and you probably made the Jabla happier.
No.
The reason is this.
I have an explanation for this. Someone has put something in Cross's water this afternoon before he joined the podcast.
And you know why I say this? I say this because Yemi, Cross, Jabs, one of our reflections when we thought to set up Misaligned was to have these conversations with the hope that we learn, we rub minds, we shift, and that our audience, and that we encode this and leave it somewhere in public, and so that our audience listening to us speak as we do when we meet at birthday parties and Christmas parties and Eid parties and discuss issues that concern us and the world. Not because we're experts, but because we're interested.
We are concerned. We're just concerned citizens.
We are just interested. And so, Cross, you are a living testament that Misaligned is achieving what we wanted to achieve.
No, this has been a fantastic conversation. I have loved every bit of it. I will go away here, joyed by what Farouk has explained, and I see Jab has also kind of approved by rejoicing, but I'm still going to be trying to investigate what it is that has been put in Cross's water, and I will be researching. But yeah, it's been a pleasure, guys. Let's do this again next week.
As always.
Wow.
Thank you.
Signing out.
Cheers.